In the last lecture, we added the logo. Let's now add the navigation items. And I will outsource these items into their own component because I actually want to reuse the navigation items in the side drawer later on. So for that reason, I will actually create a new subfolder in navigation and I'll name it navigation items like this. Now in navigation items folder, I'll of course create a navigation items JavaScript file which should, well, hold the JSX for the navigation items. In there, I will, as always, export a function in the end where I may receive some props, but I won't even need them here. I could still add them, of course. I will need to import React from React, and I want to export navigation items as a default. Now, how should the navigation items look like? Here, I want to create this unordered list which makes up my navigation items. And in there, we want to have the individual navigation items, which are list items with an anchor tag inside, which would look something like that, a link. Now, these are my navigation items. We can even go as far as outsourcing the single links into their own components. And if you want to do that or not is of course totally up to you. You don't have to do that. You could also argue for having only one component, the navigation items component, which holds both the list and the individual items. But since I will add quite some styling to the individual list items, I will actually outsource them. So inside the navigation items folder, I'll create another subfolder, the navigation item folder. And again, this splitting of components is totally optional. In that newly created folder, I'll create a navigation item.js file, which should then hold the individual navigation item. So there I'll create a constant navigation item, which is a function which receives props and returns JSX. And of course here I'll also add my React import and in the end export this function as the default. And then the JSX for a single navigation item, of course, simply is this here, this code of a list item. I'll grab that and return it here essentially. Now I need CSS files for both components, for the navigation item and for the navigation items. So navigation items should also receive a CSS code. Now let's start with the navigation items. There I will add my navigation items class and I want to set a margin of 0 here and a padding of 0 and a list style of none, because navigation items, this CSS class, is going to get added to an unordered list and I don't want to have the default list style there. Now I'm actually not developing this mobile first because we don't have the side drawer yet and we can't see that in the side drawer for that reason. So let's start desktop first here and style these navigation items to look good in the toolbar. We'll of course then also adjust them for mobile devices later. Now I want to use display flex here to align the list items next to each other. And I will set align items to center here to make sure they're vertically centered. Finally, I want to set the height to 100% to take the full height of the toolbar. With this setup, I actually got all the styling I want for the navigation items. Let's now go to the individual navigation item. So there I'll create a navigation item class. And here I want to make sure that they of course look good on the toolbar. So first of all, I'll give the list items a margin of 0, a box sizing of border box, and a display of flex. I actually need to add this to make sure that I can center the link vertically, the link inside the list item. I'll set the height to 100%. I do this because I have a special idea about how I want to have active links look. I'll set the width to auto basically, and therefore we can omit it. Width will become important later once we add mobile design. I'll set align items to center though, because I set this display flex, as I said, to center the link vertically. For that, I also need to set align items center. Then we can move on and set navigation item anchor tag to style the links inside the list item. Color should be white so that it stands out from the brown background. Text decoration will be set to none so that it's not underlined. I'll set a height of 100% to take the full height, and a padding of, let's say, 16 pixels and 10 pixels. So 16 pixels top and bottom, 10 pixels left and right. I'll also add a border bottom of 4 pixels solid and transparent, which of course will be invisible, but this border will become important once we actually highlight a link, once we hover over it. I also need to give it box sizing border box to make sure that the height really includes the padding and the border. I'll also change the display to block so that my height has an effect. Let's now also style links over which we hovered. Let's style links which are active, so which are clicked on, and links which have the active class I later want to assign to links on which page we are. So active links should have a background color of, let's say, a light brown color. So let's see, 8F5C2C. That's a nice color I picked in advance. And now I want to style the bottom border. I want to keep the 4 pixels I already set up here. But now, of course, it should not be transparent, but I have a nice bluish color I want to use. 40A4C8 is the color. And the color of the text should be white. Now with that, we got the links styled. Let's now see if they look good. I'm going to save that, and I need to assign my CSS classes as a next step. Let's start with the navigation items. There, I'll import my classes from the respective CSS file and assign it to my unordered list. Class name should be classes, and there it's navigation items, plural. And in the navigation item, I also want to import my classes from the respective CSS file. But here, of course, the class name is a different one. Here, the class name I should assign is classes, and then it's navigation item without an S at the end, of course. And let me simply wrap this to make it a bit easier to read. Now, we wouldn't see anything because right now we're not including any navigation items. So any single navigation items in our navigation items component. So first of all, we need to import navigation item, the single component for a single link, from navigation item. So from this JavaScript file. And then we can start including the navigation item component here, self-closing. And of course, we also need to pass some props to configure that link, because each link has its own destination it should point to and its own caption. So we can simply use the caption with props children so that we actually wrap the text we want to display with our own component. And we can then set the link here, ref, dynamically by pulling that from, let's say, props link, something like that. Now we can also accept the active class, so we can add a class name here and can bind this to a little conditional check. I'll just wrap it over multiple lines so that it fits into one line. We can say if, let's say, props active is true, and we will need to pass that prop into this component therefore. If that is true, then the class name should be classes active. Keep in mind, for navigation item, we did define this active class here. It only works when attached to a link, but still, this is a class which will be scoped. So we will set this class. Otherwise, if active is not set, we'll just set null as a class name. So we won't add a CSS class. So there are 2 props we expect in this component, link, active, and we should wrap the actual text of the link with our own navigation item component. So back in navigation items, let's turn this from a self-closing component to a component with opening and closing tag. And now we can start adding our links here. And for now, this will not be super spectacular, but we will add more and more links and real routing later in the app. So let's add the burger builder here, and let's maybe add the checkout page here for now. Then we need to set these props I mentioned. Link should just lead to the starting page because we don't have routing in there right now, so we don't have any real links. And for the first item, I'll also set the active prop. And since this is a Boolean value, I only have to assign it like this. We don't have to set active equal to true, though we could do that. But for Boolean props, we can just pass it like this. Now, with that, we got our navigation items set up. Now we need to use our navigation items component in the toolbar. So there, I'll add an import navigation items from, and now let's move to the navigation items folder and import it from the navigation items.js file. And let's use it here, of course, inside the nav element. Let's add navigation items as a self-closing element. Now with that, make sure all files are saved. Let's go back and we should have a navigation which looks like this, where we hover over the items and they get this style, where we see the active link. We can of course click on them, but that just reloads the page because we always load just slash as a route, which is our root page. And we'll take care about the routing later, but I'm happy that we have working and nice looking navigation items now. Now again, this will have to be adjusted once we add the side drawer and add mobile navigation, but for now it looks great. Speaking of mobile navigation, let's have a look at this next.